Hello and welcome. You're turned into the SNU podcast. I'm Shemunti, your host, and on the eve of the fourth National Media Conclave, organized by the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication at Sister Nivedita University, we are very delighted to have this very vibrant personality as our keynote speaker today, Miss Amrita Ganguly, a powerhouse of experience and inspiration. With over 2 decades of media communication experience in industry, she has worked with some of the most iconic brands in the industry like Times of India, BBC, Walt Disney, as well as Z Media. And today she serves as the Chief Diversity Officer of Tata Motors. Hello, ma'am. Welcome to our university as well as to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
My very first question to you is that to the view, what do you think inclusive communication look like in today's media as well as in corporate world?
Right. So I think inclusion as a concept is about, I like to simplify it as, you call me to your dinner, but did you help me decide the menu? Like, did I participate in your menu? So while I feel a lot of us are improving our diversity very well, we will want to bring in women into the organization. We would want to bring in tribal representation into, say, mainstream media. We have a tribal cook in a master chef, or we'll have some entrepreneur who'll come into Shark Tank. So we are doing representation well. But if you actually ask me what the true spirit of inclusion is, that are they participating in the decision making process? Are they representing diverse voices that will influence the outcome that we are taking decisions on? And that's a piece where I feel not enough is happening. But so while representation is a start and it's important, we must systematically use diversity to build plurality of thought, but it does not mean that that's enough. It's important that we include diverse voices in decision making so that the outcome can be more universal and factors everybody's well being. That's the way I look at it.
Thank you, ma'am. Do you think digital and social media are empowering marginalized voices or they're creating some kind of barriers?
So there's a very beautiful line that when in my work with Tata Steel Foundation, when we would interact with the community members from across the country, there was a senior from a community who said, and I'll say the line in Hindi because that's the language he used. He told that पीछे रह जाने के नए नए तरीके बढ़ जा रहे. Where one would look at technology and digital interventions as a method of bridging gaps. But the fact is, it's still connected with material access. But the fact is, even if that access is slow and we are trying to bring in technology into our remote villages, electricity into our remote villages, and solar power into the remote villages, it's not, the permeation is not as strong as we would like it to be. But at the same time, we are seeing magic happens when technology does reach the right creators. So whether it's a Mandeshi radio that runs in Gujarat, or it's a tribal RJ that we have in Jharkhand, or we are looking at certain tribal fellowship students that work with the Tata Steel Foundation, who are working on preserving some aspect of their culture. And they strongly leverage social media and technology because they understand the power of it. So once you give the opportunity, yes, there are some fantastic stories happening, but has it reached a plateau where it's meaningfully impacting change? I don't think so. So lots to be done in that.
But what kind of barriers do you think that it will affect the young minds? I mean, the childs of those kind of community, how will they come up?
So, see, I think that you're asking a very important anthropological question, which is, we keep talking about Maslow's hierarchy, right? That you look at roti kapra makan, then you look at social connections, then you look at self-actualization. What has happened with the permeation of social content to remote areas where we still don't have access to education, health, or employment, we are selling aspiration. So when a small child in a remote village location looks at social content, the algorithm or the preferences both, I'm not saying it's a one-way problem, it's a two-way problem. It's such that they actually end up consuming content. And I'll give examples. Could be a dance competition, could be a singing competition. Suddenly that is fashionable. That my 5 minutes of fame sitting in front of some celebrity judges is what my career is about. And if those voices get oriented only for those 5 minutes of fame, what will happen to nation development? What will happen to change narratives? What will happen to actual work at the ground? So that is a threat that is quite real in terms of the kind of polarization that current content can do to youngsters. That's one. The second thing is also propaganda reaches faster, which means that I can influence your opinion sitting in a remote location by constantly bombarding you with repeated messages and without taking any names. That's a very powerful psychological tool that even political organizations use, because if I keep selling fake content to you, your logic will slow down and eventually you will start believing that what you have been told. So that brainwashing is again something that unfortunately it's a tool, but it is being leveraged for something that is not correct. At the same time, if you look at technology as access to a universe of learning, there are enough stories, but not enough. I think there are few stories where technology brought in learning. So, for example, there is a Classroom in the Cloud project that looks at UK grandmothers teaching Sundarban children through the cloud program, through technology. And if you actually go there, young, small boys or girls have a British accent.
Oh, wow.
Right. So now these are pockets where technology is also being leveraged. Then there's a whole there are concepts that were run where a laptop was put in a box in various villages, and the children were just allowed to play with that laptop. And what the data showed, that self-learning got amplified several times, because in spite of no teacher being present, just by hit and miss, they figured out how to operate the laptop and visit a site, see something, they figured it out. So technology can be a huge accelerator, but in terms of content and malintention content, those can be deterrents, where the purpose of youngsters in contributing to their own lives and to the society at large can be hugely deflected. Because I'll share this very, very transparently with you. When I go to the any kind of remote location, I would see three things. One is a lot of kids have, a lot of boys, young boys have from the tribal communities, they'll have a bike because they have the whole dhoom, machismo happening. They'll have a mobile phone for sure, and usually a smartphone and not a button phone. And the third thing, and that I smile because this is how culture can permeate negatively, they will have blonde highlights. Right? How did that reach there? It did. But can we take other things also to them? No, when we take them science, we take them technology, language, access to them. And if that is done with intention, we can change the direction of where this is going. So your concerns are right. I really feel that, like fire, it's a tool. When fire first got invented or discovered, you can use it for good, you can use it for bad. Technology itself is a tool like AI. It can really, really democratize opportunity, but it can also be used negatively. That's my summary, at least.
Really great, ma'am. You have worked with global platforms like BBC, Walt Disney. How have those experiences shaped your approach to communication in India?
So, two key learnings I feel from my experience with the international brands is that they understand the concept of brand building and brand uniformity way more in terms of, probably because they perhaps started earlier. We do have some strong brands in India, and I've had the good privilege of working with them, like the Tatas, for example. But what has come is that Indian brands, the globally respected brands, are often value driven in terms of this is a strong brand, ethical brand. The West is very good in creating brands that may not be value driven, but they sell experiences. So a Disney will sell an experience. There are other brands. A Google is selling an experience. Excuse me. They have crafted a machinery, and that's a machinery we don't see as consumers, where a consistent experience of every consumer across the globe, whether you're in Indonesia or South America or Japan or Netherlands, doesn't matter. Your experience with that brand will be same. But it takes that kind of machinery for that brand to succeed. So they really have perfected the art of branding and brand experience. India, we have our own interpretations, but the most successful brands I feel are the ones based. So we have the House of Tatas, we have the Mahindras, we have the Godrej. They are very value-driven brands, and there is no machinery that is kind of saying this brand is good, this brand is good. Of course, there are some brands who will do their own propaganda, but this was one learning that we can really create master stories by creating a machinery behind it. And if we can use that for good and to amplify values, we can do magic.
Well, we are short of time. My last question to you is that we, the young generation, we are mostly lost. We lack patience, we lack attention. How to hold on particular things, or say it for career, for studies, or any type, any particular thing. How to hold on something.
I always feel every generation is going to confound the older generation. So whether it was my great great grandfather, or it is my parents, or it's me and my child, we will always struggle to understand the younger generation. But I think a good opportunity has come to society right now. And I give this narrative often that my grandfather worked to survive. My father may have worked to semi survive, semi thrive. I 100% work to thrive. So, therefore, if all those needs are met, what will the next generation do? Two things I would want to leave your audience with for deep thought is that mental well-being has a huge contribution towards your overall well-being, right? It's like driving a car with inflated wheels. So what you're eating, what you're consuming, the health you're building, physical health, your adequate sleep, not looking at narcotics, not looking at drugs, creating a good instrument for you to create a solid base is something that is directly linked to mental wellness. We don't realize that our gut health is connected to how we feel. We are feeling depressed, angry, upset. Now you're saying, why is she talking about health when I'm talking about careers? What's happening is that our capability of dealing with problems directly comes from the strength we have in our mind. So if you have built your mind to be stronger and more resilient, then your problem solving capability will improve. The problem is that in a diet that is processed food, sugar, all of that, the mental risks associated, America is waking up to it now because their diet is completely processed, ultra processed food. So therefore, children are suffering from ADHD and different kinds of anxiety disorders, and therefore violence has gone up. Sudden college school shootouts happen because children don't know how to process emotions. So if you connect all of that, diet, rest, food, and the family environment, if we create children with mental well-being, their capacity to navigate ambiguity improves. So it's normal for youngsters to not have answers. You're not supposed to have answers. But the most powerful advice that I can give youngsters, which I heard, was there are 3 stages in life, and in any given time, you will have 2 of 3 things. And what are those 2 things? Money, time, energy. So when you're young, you will not have money, you will have time and energy. So invest in making sure that the next 2 phases of your life, you're building on that. When you're in the middle phase, you have money, you have energy, you don't have time because you're busy all the time. That's probably where I am right now. But your 2 things are there, 1 thing is not there. And when you're older, you have money, you have lot of time, you don't have energy. So if you look at this equation of life, it's all right you don't have money, but use your time and energy to build the strongest version of yourself. And answers will happen. And I love this line, which apparently Ratan Tata never said, but it's attributed to him. He says there are no right decisions, or he didn't say, but this quote goes to him. He said, there are no right decisions, take a decision and make it right. So if you proceed in life with that conviction that, yes, I will do communication. I've taken up, I'll do PR. Can I bring my A game to it? Can I make an impact? And there's a beautiful theory in Japanese culture. What you're good at, what earns you a living, and what serves society, when they're overlap, they call it ikigai, right? And if you find your ikigai at this age, you have cracked it. Right? So try to blend your skills, your livelihood, and your impact to society, because if you do one without the other two, it will be an incomplete story. So all the best to you and your colleagues, and thank you so much for having me here.
Well, that was indeed a very enriching session. For more such conversation, you need to keep your eyes on the SME podcast. Thank you for watching.